Welcome to Wake Up and Teach by Kelly Education, where we uncover inspiring stories and strategies for reimagining our nation's education workforce.
Hi, I'm Nicola Suarez, President of Kelly Education, and this is your front row seat to the future of the education workforce on Wake Up and Teach. Today, we're focusing on a critical issue that affects every school district, the fiscal side of education staffing. Joining us is Kelly Coash Johnson, Executive Director of the American Association of School Personnel Administrators. Kelly brings a wealth of knowledge on today's topic and will share how districts and schools across the country are reassessing their staffing models and getting creative with budgets to build a more sustainable future for our education workforce. From resourceful budgeting strategies to long-term planning for supporting educators, this conversation is packed with insights you won't want to miss. So let's dive in. Kelly, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you, Nikki, and thank you, Kelly Education, for having me.
It's great, and it's really terrific to have you here. So let's start by giving our listeners some context. School districts are navigating really tough financial landscapes, and especially with shrinking budgets and their increasing operational costs across the board. And, with the loss of the emergency federal funding of the ESSER funds, when we think about these challenges, what are the most significant financial obstacles schools are facing with staffing these days?
Absolutely. Districts are struggling with regards to budgets, depending on what state they're in, of course. But the biggest issue is probably competing competitive wages. So in order to attract and retain our staff, we have to remain competitive. And the private sector wages are increasing ever so much, and education is a little bit slower to adapt. So with cost of living and depending on where your school district is, it is just increasingly becoming difficult to keep up with the times with regards to competitive salary. Secondly, the districts are struggling a lot with increased costs for healthcare and pensions and other benefits. So, healthcare and retirement typically has been then one of the big sellers for becoming an educator. Schools typically offer amazing healthcare packages and offerings, as well as retirement systems, teacher retirement systems, clear down to, principal retirement systems, et cetera. And those costs are rising too. And so trying to balance that along with the wages is probably the biggest difficulty doing that. I have a saying that says retention is the new recruitment. And so staffing shortages is just exacerbating all of this in there, and the retention rate is not helping. So while finances are a critical piece, we've yet to fully address the national educator shortage overall. So, we're working at ASPA to partner with different organizations like the State Directors of Teacher Certification and the Association of Colleges of Teacher Education to really look and drill down into some of these issues that are facing our districts with regards to both the educator shortage and just trying to maintain our districts.
Yeah, that's a lot. And I'm sure that some districts are probably more on it than maybe even smaller school districts, as an example. But, when you look across the board, have you seen districts and schools really beginning to reassess some of the issues that you just talked about and starting to sort of make steps to redesign their workforce models so that they do have the coverage and the quality of education?
Yeah. So what we're really seeing is districts are really taking time to evaluate their strategic staffing and to evaluate their school district needs. These can be done through HR audits, they can be done through culture climate studies, but really trying to drill down into evaluating what's working and what is not. So, for example, in some of the work we're doing with those 5 shifts to address the educator shortage, one of the pieces is ask. Sometimes we tend to put forth things that we think are helping with the shortages, but indeed they're not really utilized or they're not needed as much as we think they are. So, really drilling down to asking those questions and then finding those cost saving measures there.
And I think that's a really important point. And I would tell you, obviously, myself and my organization know a little bit about short term fixes. And,
Mhm.
when we think about that versus long term sustainability, I
Right.
definitely see that many districts, that's a challenge for them to sort of balance that. But how do you think that districts can navigate this balance to avoid future workforce crises?
Right. So, some other areas that we're seeing is flexible staffing, using building substitutes to address absences is certainly important. Shared staffing agreements between districts is a big one. Utilizing your outside partnership relationships is really, really big. And then, of course, the biggest growth we've seen is grow your own programs and apprenticeship programs that are really working to both build the pipeline in the district, but also support the community.
And we certainly see a lot of that too. And I completely agree that we've seen such great success. So, Kelly, I want to switch gears here a little bit. I want to talk about professional development from the perspective of mental health initiatives as well. We know that they're incredibly essential for supporting the educational environment, not only for students, but also for teachers. How do you think school districts can continue to prioritize, invest in these critical areas? Because, there's still sort of a post follow up even from the pandemic, but they're still, navigating all of their financial issues, especially when it comes to budgets and trying to be able to meet the needs of everything.
Yeah. So, professional development is something that we as an organization are very supportive of. I personally believe professional development can be the gateway to both improving your retention, but also your recruitment strategies. So, huge supporter of trying to do that. What we really want to see right now is the ability to differentiate your professional development. So, really looking at how to make it not one size fits all. This can be differentiated by content area, by career pathways. It also should be differentiated by your skill level. So, like if you're a novice teacher, if you're a mid career teacher or educator, or if you're a veteran educator, the professional development supports should be different. Now, saying that, that's what we would love to see happen. But to your point, the budgets and the supports are tight, and it's hard to do these real innovative practices of differentiating your professional development when you may not have the money to do it. So, things that I've seen is districts using any type of community supports. So looking outside of just the education world and really leaning into their community, their states. For us, we've seen a lot of our state affiliates do different professional development for not only the HR directors, but for some of the groups that the HR directors really want to support professional development for. And then this one's a tricky one to say today, but there has been some amazing grants out there that are available to specifically support professional development. And when we talk about competing with the private sector, professional development is one of those areas that they're doing circles around us. They really have leaned into professional development and career growth a long time ago. And again, education is a little bit slower to adapt, but we still believe that for recruitment and retention of all of our staff, professional development is super important. And when I say all, I mean not just our teachers. It includes our substitute teachers, regardless where we get them from, and building them into a community of support and positive culture through professional development.
That's terrific. And I hear that across the board too in many of our different client partnerships. And I'm really glad to hear that substitute teachers to be, an extension of the
Yes.
workforce. It's amazing.
Yes.
Yeah. So there is no doubt, I'm sure that you've heard so many inspiring success stories or even some really standout examples of how school districts that even with, the conclusion of federal funds like ESSER have successfully really tackled their financial challenges while still continuing to support both students and teachers. Do you have any examples that you would love to share? Because I would love to share that with our audience.
Absolutely. So we're super lucky. We have a program called the EHCLE, which is a certification for executive human capital leaders in education. And one of the requirements to complete that program is that individuals have to do kind of like a year long innovative practice. And this last year in particular, we had some amazing districts from around the country present on just that topic. What are they doing innovative to address budgets, changing atmosphere and environments, as well as the shortage? And we have seen sessions out of Illinois on total rewards. So, how to develop a program of total rewards to address their recruitment and the practical approaches that came with that. And by the way, when they talk about total rewards, it's not just your pay.
Right.
It is kind of what we talked about earlier. It's really drilling down to what's needed, what's not. We might offer pet insurance when nobody wants pet insurance,
Right.
or we may not offer pet insurance when everybody wants pet insurance. And so, really drilling down to that total rewards, probably the one that came out strongest this year was the redesigning of onboarding and orientation and mentoring programs,
That's great.
which, by the way, include again all those staffing levels and differentiating them. So, not having an onboarding or a orientation process that is a one size fits all, and making sure that you are including everyone, because I have no problem saying it. Sometimes substitutes get the shorter end of the stick and they're not included in some of these other building level, activities or things like that. So having districts share about how they are redesigning their onboarding and overhaul program to include all of those has been really amazing to see. So, a district out of Ohio, they did the 4 C's of onboarding. So, compliance, clarification, culture, and connection. And in her data, she really hit on that connection piece as coming back and being told that was one of the key areas. So when we talk about the mental health supports and allowing educators to have a sense of well-being and connection to their positions, that was really important to her study on onboarding. And then, of course, those teacher apprenticeship programs, we've seen a lot of work in those where you bring them in early and you bring them in fully. So it's not just to show up and be a little bit a part of it, but it's like, let's embed you into the culture of what is happening. And so that was really neat to see. St. Charles Parish out of Louisiana did a huge deep dive into their mentoring and induction program and in their environment of change, which is kind of what we're talking about. So they redesigned their mentor induction program to meet some of their strategic staffing goals. So you got to always put them back to the strategic staffing goals. But they believe that they needed to increase their focus of nurturing our new educators, which so we're seeing a lot of those words, building community, nurturing. And by the way, a big piece of the Louisiana St. Charles Parish is offering comprehensive development and support to ensure that the talented are that they hired thrive and more importantly stay. So that's probably this past year the most movement I've seen is on those early supports, the professional growth, and then that sense of belonging and community has been huge.
I absolutely love and subscribe to everything you just said. I think that's fantastic. So I know we're coming to the end of our conversation, but as you look ahead, what final advice would you give to district leaders and especially school personnel administrators on building a more financially sustainable and resilient workforce, especially?
Yeah. So stay in touch with all of your colleagues. So, one of my big goals at ASPA is to share as many best practices and innovative work we possibly can. Constantly pushing out. Did you hear what St. Charles Parish did in Louisiana? Did you hear what Indian Hills School District in Ohio is doing? And really pushing out those innovative practices because A, you don't know what you don't know until you don't know it.
Mm,
And then B, we all need to learn from each other. And for as much as we might be different because we're in different states and we might have different communities, the work of human capital leadership does have an underlying similarity. So picking up practices from your friends, and staying super involved. What we're concerned about is with budgets that the first thing that will go is school district leaders' ability to maintain their own professional growth, right? So their own membership in organizations like ASPA and their ability to attend professional development where they would get this. And so you don't have to travel across the country to get all this sometimes. And you just have to look. And then state affiliates are a great place to make sure that you're staying involved too. So, we have 38 state affiliates across the country that meet and they talk about the same things, innovative practice and best practices to address shortfalls and things like that. And so really just staying on top of what everybody else is doing. And I guarantee just by a little bit of looking and a little bit of participating, you will find one or two good ideas that you can take back and implement in your own district to make a difference.
I love that, Kelly. I just want to thank you for this morning's conversation. It's been incredibly enlightening, and thank you for your expertise and the work that you and your organization do every single day.
Well, thank you for supporting us with the ever-growing need of substitute teachers and other, areas of critical need.
Absolutely. What a fascinating discussion with Kelly Coash Johnson, Executive Director of the American Association of School Personnel Administrators. Her insights into the financial and staffing challenges districts and schools face today have given us a clearer picture of the road ahead. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please consider leaving us a rating or review. It helps us to reach more listeners like you. I'm Nicholas Suarez, and I look forward to having you with us again next time on Wake Up and Teach. Take care.
This podcast was produced in partnership with Amaze Media Labs.